Okay, good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming here today. I'm Rick Kester, president of the Ontario Good Roads Association, and I'd like to acknowledge and thank Jessica Bell and her staff for their efforts and hospitality on this file, as well as Jess Spieker for joining us to tell her story from Friends and Family for Safe Streets. Also joining us today is Scott Butler, Manager of Policy and Research from the Ontario Good Roads Association. The Ontario Good Roads Association is calling on the Government of Ontario to take leadership on making Ontario roads safer for all users and create a multi-stakeholder task force for Vision Zero in this province. In 2018, there were 35,746 fatal and personal injury collisions in Ontario. By changing how roads and other infrastructure are designed, as well as how the public is educated about road safety, the number of fatalities and severe injuries on our roads can be greatly reduced. We know what the solutions are to avoid these road tragedies, and now is the time for the government to show leadership. The people of Ontario deserve better, and the Ontario government can deliver it with this action plan. The benefits of Vision Zero go beyond strengthening the safety for Ontarians. These benefits extend to the public health care system, as well as the environment, and offers economic benefits for municipalities and businesses. Ontario is open for business. Let's give it a safe and secure pathway to do so. I would now call upon Jessica Bell, MPP, New Democratic Party.
Thanks for inviting me to this event. I'm Jessica Bell. I'm the MPP for University Rosedale and the opposition transit critic. There's no question we need to take action on road safety. No one should be afraid to cross the street, ride their bike to work, or walk their kids to school. But every day I hear from constituents that they are scared to do exactly that. And nearly every other day I read or hear or talk to a resident who has been nearly hit by a car or hit by a car and injured and killed. That's why we need a provincial Vision Zero strategy. The City of Toronto has a Vision Zero strategy, and they are taking measures to improve road safety, like adding crosswalks, installing red light cameras, and improving road design. But it's not enough for the province to sit back and do nothing. BC, Alberta, Manitoba, PEI, and the Northwest Territories have adopted a Vision Zero approach to road safety, and it's time that Ontario did the same. A provincial Vision Zero plan would unite the areas under provincial jurisdiction. That includes over 16,000 kilometres of roads and the Highway Traffic Act. It includes municipal infrastructure funding programs and roadway design guidelines. A provincial Vision Zero strategy would help support municipalities across Ontario in developing their own local plans, and it would help make sure that the provincial funding is available to move forward on important Vision Zero initiatives. We need to do this because, quite frankly, it saves lives. We know that because we have seen what has happened in other areas around the world that have adopted this approach, from Sweden, Washington State, and New York City. And we know that road safety is a huge problem. And we know that pedestrians, cyclists, and road safety workers and road workers are especially vulnerable. 47 people have died this year on Toronto's roads, and that's 47 people too many. That's the price we're paying for not taking action, and that price is too high. It's time we took action and developed a Vision Zero strategy for Ontario. Thank you.
My name is Jessica Spieker, and I'm a member of Friends and Families for Safe Streets. We are a group of people whose loved ones have been killed in road violence or who have survived road violence ourselves. We're fighting for safe streets across Ontario so that nobody else has to suffer the preventable violence, trauma, loss, pain, and grief that we have. I'm here to tell you about why it is imperative that the province of Ontario adopt Vision Zero. Every crash is preventable, and the most effective and economical way to avert crashes is through better infrastructure design. First, I'd like to share my story so it's clear what this initiative is trying to prevent. In 2015, I was riding my bike to work, and a woman driving a huge SUV T-boned me, slamming her SUV into me at high speed. She broke my spine, she inflicted a brain injury, and she severely damaged the soft tissue on the left side of my body, which was the side that she hit. Because of this, I developed a large blood clot in my left leg, and then a piece of that blood clot broke off, chewed through my heart, and it landed across both lobes of my lungs. That's called a massive bilateral pulmonary embolism, and it's often fatal. So I nearly died twice, not only because of a negligent driver, but because of extremely dangerous road design. The after effects of my injuries will never go away. and my arthritis and pain are only ever going to get worse as I age. My knees, shoulders, and back hurt, and I feel like my body is slowly stiffening up and calcifying, and that's a horrible way to feel as a young, formerly very active person. The crash has severely ripped apart my mental health, and I now struggle with anxiety, depression, and some PTSD symptoms. But as bad as that is, I'm one of the relatively lucky ones. Incomprehensibly worse is what has happened to my colleagues and friends and families for Safe Streets whose loved ones were killed. They've experienced paper bags filled with their beloved spouse's possessions handed over by the police on their doorstep as the police deliver the news that breaks their world in half. They get the news that their loved one bled and suffered alone, dying on some indifferent patch of asphalt because a driver struck them, because the street that they were on did not protect them. My friends have watched their loved ones dying in a hospital bed before they succumb to their injuries and the heavy shackles of grief take over. People lose their children to road violence. There is no more perverse affront to the natural order of life than the violent and sudden death of a child. It's the kind of grief and pain that never goes away. Your once normal life is suddenly torn away from you through no fault of your own. But this anguish and loss, it doesn't have to happen. Our streets don't need to be dangerous by design. The solutions in Vision Zero have been around for a long time. They're not mysterious. Excellent design treatments already exist, and no innovation is required anymore. We can simply copy the tremendous successes that have been implemented widely around the world already. There's no reason for Ontario not to be a leader in road safety. Riding a bike or walking in Ontario should never be a death sentence, yet in 2018 across Ontario, 117 pedestrians were killed, and nearly 6,000 vulnerable road users were injured. So if you take the pain and grief that I've told you about, multiply it by thousands, the devastation mounting year over year over year. The human toll of road violence is truly staggering. It's a silent public health crisis, and it needs to be addressed through bold, effective action. Given that the solutions are so clear and relatively easy to implement, it's a moral imperative that we move forward with Vision Zero at the provincial level. Safe streets in Ontario should not be optional.
My name's Scott Butler. I'm the Manager of Policy and Research for the Ontario Good Roads Association. One of the distinct disadvantages of speaking after Jess is that I'm left wondering if I have anything meaningful to add to this discussion. Frankly, given the choice, I'd rather get on with doing everything that can be done to make sure no one ever has to join friends and families for safe streets. The Ontario Good Roads Association and its member municipalities and First Nations feel the same. For too long, we've simply accepted stories like Jess's, and this needs to stop. Inaction has become too costly and unconscionable. Over the last year, OGRA has engaged people and organizations across this province to understand how they feel about the current state of affairs on our roads. In addition to municipalities, NGOs, academic researchers, corporations, and activists have expressed dismay and frustration with the carnage that is ruining lives and imposing an enormous cost on society. Vision Zero offers the Government of Ontario and Ontario municipalities the opportunity to remedy this unfortunate state of affairs, while at the same time realizing a number of different benefits. There's never been a better time to take this step. Today, our roads are being used differently than they have at any point in the recent past. There are more cyclists, there are semi-autonomous vehicles, there are new modes of getting around that simply didn't exist 10 years ago. Congestion and its favorite cousin, frustration, are growing problems across Ontario. All levels of government have struggled to keep pace with this change. At the same time, the Government of Ontario is committed to making a multi-generational investment in our transportation systems. New roads need to be designed as safely as possible. Vision Zero elements need to be incorporated, and as existing roads are rehabilitated, they too need to have Vision Zero elements brought into those projects. Already, a number of municipalities have begun to adopt Vision Zero. However, 125 years of experience has taught the Ontario Good Roads Association that provincial leadership is vital if we're to ensure that the benefits of this approach are realized in every corner of this province and in every community. By implementing Vision Zero, Ontario stands to benefit, as I mentioned earlier, in a number of different ways. For municipalities, a robust implementation of Vision Zero will help them become more effective managers of their liability. Road accidents are one of the main causes of lawsuits and also cause ever-increasing insurance premiums. By cutting the number of accidents, the number of lawsuits will fall. By extension, the significant burden that roadway injuries impose on the healthcare system will also be reduced. Moreover, now we're learning just as many of the devastating impacts that these accidents have had on first responders. Practically, this means scrutinizing all of the legislation, the regulations, the guidelines, the design standards that govern our current transportation network in order to find opportunities to incorporate Vision Zero's safety elements. It means modifying how we train the drivers and public. It means more crosswalks, designated lanes, bike lanes, and better lighting. Most importantly, it means placing people like Jess who've been injured or killed at the center of this discussion to remind us of why we need to do this. There's a considerable reservoir of expertise and experience in this province. Whether it's going the extra mile for safety in Temiskaming Shores, or Friends and Families for Safe Streets here in Toronto, or a local seniors group, the number of people who are prepared to do the hard work necessary to realize this is truly inspiring. Make no mistake, Ontarians are looking for leadership and action when it comes to road safety. This is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to democratize our roads and ensure everyone feels at home and safe there. We simply need to get moving.
Okay, so we'll open up the floor for questions, if there are any.
What do you think the provincial government is not doing now that it really should be?
Well, I think there are a lot of safety things that are being done on our roadways right now, and then Ontario does have a reasonably safe province with respect to our transportation networks. But this Vision Zero, it's a framework, it's a more holistic view of everything that we do, including education, which is obviously a very important part of any safety initiative that we want to have on our roadways. In addition, I think enforcement is obviously one of the issues that is also very part of the overall framework, but it is more than that. It's design improvements. It's looking at the bigger picture and putting it all in a framework that it can be used across the province, from the smallest municipality to the largest. And I think that's what's missing currently in our system.
Cities have the ability to do kind of the things that need to be done on roads, whether it's change speed limits, put in speed bumps, stop signs, all those kinds of little details that they need. What specifically could be done at a provincial level to impact Vision Zero?
I think we'd be looking at opening up things like the Ontario traffic manuals. We'd be looking at the Ontario provincial standards and specifications, which dictate how roads are designed. We need to look at the Highway Traffic Act and see if there's opportunities to incorporate elements into that Highway Traffic Act, which would then have the knock-on effect of causing enforcement to adapt to this reality. The province has been, and the legislators have been very, I think, successful and prudent in identifying small opportunities to make headway on road safety. What's missing is that macro level approach where we say these are the broad priorities. And as I said, with MTO's leadership provided on this file, municipalities will adopt it very quickly. The cost of doing so, I think, is considerable, but it's offset by the incalculable cost of not doing so.
I have a few responses to that. What I think is so important about having a Vision Zero approach is that it brings the philosophy of reducing road deaths and injuries to zero to every planning decision that we make. That is currently not there in Ontario. We have it in other provinces, but we don't have it here. There are also short-term measures that the Ontario government could move forward on that they haven't. For instance, we did introduce a vulnerable road users bill that would have tougher penalties for drivers that injure or kill a pedestrian or a cyclist if the driver is breaking the law when they're doing it. So right now, if you're a driver and you're texting and you kill a pedestrian, you could walk away with just a fine. That's not acceptable. In addition, municipalities have been asking for approval from the provincial government to move forward with photo radar, which means if a car speeds by a school or speeds by a senior facility, they are found and fined. Right now, that's not happening. In my riding of University Rosedale on Avenue Road, we have cars being clocked at 120 kilometres an hour going by a seniors facility. That's not okay. Those kind of speeds result in people dying. We don't want that.
Do you think the Ford administration would be open to adopting Vision Zero?
We've had very constructive conversations with the minister and the associate minister on this. This is a nonpartisan issue. Every sort of political persuasion wants to see headway made on this issue, and we've been given no indication that they'd be anything less than receptive to looking at how this can be implemented.
So do you think it's just a matter of when, not if?
Oh, well, I think we know what side history is going to judge us on. So it becomes pretty clear that it's a matter of when, not if. The question is how fast we get there.
Right. The provincial government's done so much to target speeding and drunk driving and more recently distracted driving as behaviors that cause a lot of carnage on the road. Why do you think there hasn't been as much progress in taking these kinds of steps, which you all say are relatively simple things to do?
Well, the one thing I would say about Vision Zero is all the onus isn't placed exclusively on the government. The government becomes the vector by which we begin engaging the road users themselves in modifying their behavior. There's 4 E principles behind Vision Zero: enforcement, environment, engineering, and empathy. We need to look at what levers exist within the existing frameworks to begin incorporating those aspects and making sure that all road users understand there's a shared responsibility for road safety.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about the empathy, I guess, being one of those factors. Right. Do you think that, given how distracted everybody is who uses the road, drivers, people who are walking on their bicycles, do you think that there is less empathy, that there's less care for other people than there ever has been while we're trying to make our way around?
Well, I don't actually think that's entirely relevant to the conversation, because through infrastructure design you can make that irrelevant. You can make the streets safe purely by design, by implementing measures that will slow down motor vehicle speeds so that they can't strike somebody at a speed that is fatal, and you can add physical protection between motor vehicle traffic and vulnerable road users. And between those two issues, it then becomes irrelevant whether a driver is texting or not. Ideally, they're not. But if they are and they make the error, the whole premise of Vision Zero is that human error is always going to be a factor. But through design, even when crashes inevitably do happen, they're not going to inflict fatalities or severe injuries on people.
I'm not talking about human error. I'm talking, like, there's charges. There's criminal. There's Highway Traffic Act charges for careless driving. I specifically made that choice to have my head in my phone while I was behind the wheel. That's not a mistake. So I'm asking, like, how do you feel that enters into the conversation that you want to have with the government? How do you change people's behavior to take that more seriously? Because it strikes me that you could redesign every intersection in the entire city of Toronto, but you're still going to have people who insist that they have to answer that email or they need to be on the phone.
There have been steps taken to increase the penalties on this. There's been proposals put forward that would have severely raised the fines associated with this sort of behavior. Those are great. They're fundamentally good initiatives. At the same time, I think we need to impress upon people that distracted driving, whether it's texting or some other form, is dangerous. And I'm not sure that message, in spite of the efforts we've made to this point, has really resonated with people. People are beginning to understand that impaired driving is unacceptable. We haven't been able to change the mindset when it comes to distracted driving.
But just to follow up on what James said there, then how much do you think that public education has to be part of it? I mean, I cover Toronto City Hall a lot, and there's a lot of talk about all the stuff, stoplights and speed limits and speed humps and all that kind of stuff. But how much of this approach has to involve public education as well?
In my mind, it's a considerable amount. It's one of the pillars, and it goes back to driving training. It's the guides that we put out for people who are getting their license. It's about how we teach kids to navigate a world where things like e-scooters exist, where SUVs exist, train crossings exist. The idea that somehow we can make meaningful headway on this without looking at education is, I think, short-sighted.
And I just wanted to follow up too. When we talk about Vision Zero, we focus a lot on vehicular behavior, drivers, what drivers are doing, speed limits, all that kind of stuff. But does there also need to be focus on pedestrians? Because a lot of people these days are, crossing streets with headphones on, looking at their phone, wearing darker clothing or, hats, sunglasses, whatever that is. Does there need to be a focus also on pedestrian behavior?
Everything you just mentioned is victim blaming. The color of clothing that you wear doesn't affect whether a driver strikes you with their car. If you're looking, you'll see a pedestrian. If you can't, then you don't have the visual acuity to be driving a vehicle in the first place. Whether you're looking at a cell phone and you're walking, you've got earbuds in and you're walking, it's not your responsibility to do a 10-meter-high backflip to get out of the way of a driver who's violating your own right-of-way. When you have the green light, it really shouldn't matter what you're doing. So this is to focus on the behavior of the victims is victim blaming, and the statistics show us that behavior does not make a substantial contribution to road violence. It's infrastructure design and the driver behavior that our dangerous streets induce.
But with due respect, when I was a kid, when the provincial government, I'm assuming as part of the education curriculum, sent the police in to talk to us, our class about road safety, we were taught about entering an intersection safely. We were taught about attaining eye contact with drivers who were about to cross through the intersection. So I don't necessarily see it as, I don't see how it could be victim blaming when you're saying that there's a shared responsibility of safety on the road. And I think Moment's point is fair. Is there not is it fair to blame drivers solely for the carnage that's happening on the streets when it seems that everybody has a role to play?
It's also important to remember there are many people who live in our province who are really vulnerable road users. For instance, Daniela Levy is someone who is blind. When she gets off the streetcar, she used to put her life in the hands of drivers. She's not someone who can walk out of a streetcar and check to see if traffic is coming. She just has to hope. And then there's this very serious concern of seniors who have a lot of difficulty, some of them crossing a road quickly, and they are being injured and killed at rates far higher than the younger population. So when we're thinking about Vision Zero and road safety, it's important that we think about people who don't have the same kind of abilities as everyone else. And that's why we need to look at the bigger picture around planning and engineering design and things to stop these injuries and deaths from happening in the first place.
I think everybody acknowledges that people who are blind and people who can't get around because their joints are seizing up need extra care and attention. I think we all need to be more empathetic of that. But I think the anxiety that a lot of drivers feel is how, for example, in a lot of cases, mid-block crosswalks are used in 2019 where, a pedestrian will come around the post, smash the button, and just walk out into the street and wait for traffic to stop. I witnessed that last night on my way home from work. Is there not more that needs to be done to refresh people's memory, or I don't know, are they not getting this education on how to use the streets safer?
Well, I think Jessica talked on a point that's sort of one of the fundamental tenets of Vision Zero, and that is that the responsibility is shared, but it's different depending on how you're using that roadway. If I'm walking, I'm automatically put into a defensive position where I'm more concerned about people who are driving and have thousands of tons of steel and plastic surrounding them than I am if I'm on my bicycle. If I'm on my bicycle, I'm more attuned to the traffic that may be beside me, as well as pedestrians who may be stepping out into a cycling lane or into my path. How I'm using the road fundamentally defines and alters the responsibility that I have when I'm in that space. We need to have a conversation about what that looks like. The province has begun the process of bringing even more modes of transportation onto the road networks. We've seen the impact that e-scooters have had in other jurisdictions, and it's going to become increasingly more complex.
Just to follow up on what James said, I think there's no question that the the vast majority of this has to be focused on vehicles, driver behavior, and augmenting roads, whether it's through speed limits, stop signs, whatever, red light cameras, that kind of thing. But I was in Mississauga a couple of months ago, and Peel Police were doing a pedestrian safety blitz, where people were walking through design crosswalks, like you said, but they were looking at their phones, they had their headphones on, they were doing that kind of thing. And while, of course, the drivers have to be responsible, sometimes people get too caught up in right of way when it comes to their own safety. Don't we have to focus also on pedestrians to be responsible for your own behavior too? Like, of course, drivers have to be responsible, but you have to do those basic things too, because right of way is important, but it doesn't matter if you're getting drilled by a car and getting killed. So, headphones out, eyes up, that kind of behavior.
Yeah, in all fairness, all roadway users, which encompasses everyone who's using the roadway for transportation. I mean, we all have to be aware of each other. We have to be aware of the environment we're in. And we have to be safe, and we have to be certainly aware of the implications of our actions on others. I mean, it's critical, and I think that's what we need to do a better job of. So.
And if I can add one more, placing the onus on the victims to modify their behavior has never proven effective. It is not a component of Vision Zero anywhere where Vision Zero has successfully been implemented. So focusing on the innocent victims' behaviors is not effective. Focusing on victim behaviors has never prevented violence against those victims.
Okay. That's seeing no more questions. I want to thank you all very much. Thank you, our guests today, and really we look forward to the province of Ontario's response, I think. So anyway, thank you all very much and appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks for hosting.